Welcome to Autism ADHD TV. It is the place to be for parents and professionals. I'm your host, Holly Blanc Moses, the mom psychologist who gets it. We dive into all kinds of important information like behavior, social skills, and learning. All right, let's get started. Welcome, Amy Langston.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited you're here. You are an autistic advocate. So tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, so I was diagnosed on the autism spectrum at the age of 10. And since then, I have gone on to complete both my BA and my MA degrees in religious studies. That's my autistic special interest. And I'm a writer, a speaker. I teach world religions. I am a traveler, or I used to be. And I'm just always excited to talk to parents and the general public about autism and how it affects their kids, how it affects autistic adults, and all of the things surrounding the topic of autism.
Perfect. And again, thank you for being here with us today. And you forgot, Amy, one thing. You are a world-renowned speaker. So let's do a little extra there too, because you have traveled to all these different countries to speak on, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I don't know if I would say that I'm world renowned in the sense that like everyone's heard of me, but I have gone to Canada. I have gone to South Africa to speak. I also studied abroad in Switzerland during grad school. So yeah, I do have. I feel like 6 degrees of separation is real. That I'm gonna, and anywhere I go, I'm gonna know someone who knows someone who knows someone who lives there, and I can find someone anywhere who can set me up. And I've always been enriched by that cultural exposure, and I think that being autistic as a traveler is actually so helpful, because I feel like being autistic in a neurotypical world is like being in a permanent state of culture shock sometimes. So traveling to another country is really just an extension of that experience, and that fascination about how diverse the world is, and how and the cultural exchange that you get from you learn about them and they learn about you. There's always something new to discover.
Oh, that's really interesting. Okay. So you have a real passion about talking about assumptions. And so today we're going to talk about 3 common assumptions that are made about autistic children, autistic adults. And this first one is the assumption of a lack of empathy. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. Well, before I get into that, I'm going to mention some of what we were talking about before I started, that I don't want people to make assumptions about assumptions, that making assumptions is somehow bad or a reflection of poor character. Because I have found in a lot of times when I'm talking about autism in front of groups or on individual levels, is that most of the time I don't encounter prejudice. I just encounter ignorance. People just don't know. And they make these assumptions because they haven't had the experience with a diverse set of autistic people to know that those assumptions don't always apply. So assumptions are always born out of ignorance. Everyone is ignorant about something or another. And those assumptions get dispelled the more experience we have. So I don't want people to feel ashamed about making these assumptions, but just to have the openness to have them corrected is all I would say to that. So
words, Amy.
Yeah. So when it comes to the assumptions about empathy, I think that this is so problematic, especially because of how much empathy has kind of become a buzzword in our culture. Not only is it a buzzword, but it's a cultural value. And empathy is often taken as the key trait of a good person. A good person has empathy, and a bad person doesn't have empathy. So, as much as we talk about empathy and how much we see it's really important to have empathy, I think that a lot of times we don't have empathy for people who we perceive as not having empathy. And so, empathy is mostly for people who have empathy. And so, it feels like empathy then becomes limited in scope. Part of the problem is that empathy is something that some people may have, but have difficulty expressing, or have difficulty expressing it in the expected way. And I think that's true of autistics, especially because when autism and Asperger's syndrome, it used to be defined by the lack of social empathy. And I'm glad that they clarify it as it's a particular type of empathy. We need to define what social empathy is. But I think it still sticks that because autistic people can sometimes be perceived as cold or stoic or don't know how to express themselves verbally or have a different nonverbal presentation, they can think, oh, they just don't have empathy. When really, I think in a lot of cases, they have so much empathy that they kind of freeze out of all the things coming in. And sort of like how autistics get that way when they're just very overwhelmed by sensations. If they're overwhelmed by the sensation of empathy, they just freeze, or they get into the fight or flight mode. They don't know what to do, and they don't know what to say. They don't know how to express comforting words to someone. It's like, what's the right thing to say? If someone just told you, oh, my grandmother died, it's what's the right thing to say? Do you just say, I'm sorry for your loss? Or do you need to say something more than that? But if you don't say anything, it sounds like you don't care. So what do you do? And that's what I think is so much of a problem about the empathy question, is that not only do you need to have empathy, but you need to express it in a certain way. And because so many of us are not really taught communication skills, and so many of us are supposed to assume communication skills or assume that we learn it organically and can know what the other person wants intuitively, it means that empathy feels kind of like a burden in some ways, rather than just the glue that holds human connections together.
That makes a lot of sense because there are a lot of assumptions there. And over, many years of working with kids on the spectrum, I've heard from, people, and again, not coming from a malicious place at all, but really coming from a place of just not understanding and only being able to see through their own lens. And that's all we can do, right? We could try to understand as much as we can, but I am not autistic. I don't know what that experience is like. And so I'm going to be looking at all the information that I've been given and all the hundreds of people I've worked with. I think that I have a as good of an understanding as I can, being neurotypical. But there is that assumption of, again, like you said, like you're supposed to be empathetic, you're supposed to understand what the other person's going through. And I think what I see a lot of times in the children I work with is they have these feelings, they're experiencing this, but other people expect them to behave in a certain way right then and there, depending what's happening around them. And then there's assumptions built on, well, if they don't, then that means this.
Yeah. And sort of going along with what I said before, I think that what makes empathy so hard is that it feels like a duty. With what it's become today, it feels like you have a duty to be empathetic instead of empathy as a tool that enhances our understandings and relationships to other people, which I think is really what empathy should be there for. So, for instance, like I've been mistreated in the past, and I try to reflect on, well, what might be the reasons that those people did that? Like what did it come from? Is it just because I don't want to think that it's just because they were a bad person. Maybe they were under a tremendous amount of stress. We all get that way when we are under a lot of stress. Did they go into fight or flight mode because I was someone that they just didn't understand? And then I think that empathy then becomes a tool for forgiveness and releasing yourself from having to hold a grudge or have heavy feelings about something. And that's why I think empathy helps. And understanding empathy in that way, instead of this thing that you have to be like extending all the time and you get this kind of fatigue about it, I think it's really that tool for forgiveness. And the other piece to empathy, I would say, is the mutuality of it. So I think that especially for someone who's in a very hard situation, there's this expectation that I'm the one that's receiving the empathy and you're the giver of it. But I think it should be mutual, because we need to understand why the other person is expressing empathy in the way that they are in that moment.
Oh, Amy, that's so good, because if you are flexible in your idea of empathy and it's mutual, that changes everything.
Yeah.
That makes
Do we
so
need
much
to move on to the next point in the interest of time?
Sure. Number two, the assumption that there's a lack of self-awareness.
Yeah. So I think that because like autistics are so highly varied, right? There is no one autism. And I think autism should really be viewed as a category more than like this single thing that we all branch off from. And I mean, there may be a little truth to it, in which there's probably some autistics out there who don't have much self-awareness. But if autism is your lived experience, then you're used to in the day-to-day what it is that you need in order to get through things. You know that you need this chart, you need to have things laid out this way, you need to have these expectations. You're used to the adjustments that you need in order to get through things. And so it does feel kind of patronizing when people feel like they come in and be like, well, when you go into this new situation, you will need this. And it's like, no, I actually know myself enough to know what I'm going to need and what I'm going to not need. So instead of saying, oh, you're going to need this, people really need to ask more questions and listen more than they offer preemptive solutions or provide responses. So instead of being, it should be, what do you need? What can we do for you? And then when they can do something for themselves, you step aside and you let them do it. Autistic adults are not a child in an adult's body. even if they do have significant impairments, they are still an adult.
It's true. And so when you're hearing that assumption is, they need or we need to do this for them, right? Like you hear a lot of that stuff, which I think it comes from, again, like you were mentioning earlier, is how, when you want to support your child and you want to support your student, you want to support your client or patient, there are some things that you can do to set them up for maybe a situation where it worked before. Like if we use this, then it was helpful, or whatever that is. But what happens when you start thinking of it in a different way where, let me know what you need. Do you need this schedule or not really? Totally up to you. No, I don't need it. Okay, cool. Well, it's here if you want it. And really
Yeah.
a place to start in early, because I can't begin to imagine never feeling like I'm heard, just being told what I need all the time.
Yeah.
And really that's what I hear you telling me, and I can understand as best neurotypically that I can how that could be pretty frustrating too.
And I think especially for parents, and in particular, very soon after their child gets diagnosed, it's very tempting to want to use everything available to you for them and to use all the services, all the programs, all the resources. And what I want them to consider is that if utilizing all of them might actually be detrimental because having to do all this extra stuff can be very stressful. And so I think that you can take it as a little trial and error and notice how the kids respond to these services. Does it ease their burden or does it increase it? And if it is causing them so much stress to have that thing, that it doesn't outweigh the benefits of it, then it's probably a good idea to say, okay, we're not going to use that thing, and we're going to instead use the things that that provide the most benefits.
Yes, that makes so much sense. And then when we're talking about self-awareness, and we were kind of talking about this earlier before we were recording, is sometimes there is a lack of understanding about someone's level of self-awareness because of those
Yeah.
communication differences, right? So if someone is not communicating to us exactly what they're thinking or what they need in this situation, that doesn't mean that they're not knowing what they need. It means that we need to look at it in a different way. And maybe that is simply asking that question.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree.
Definitely. Okay, so let's move on to 3, assumption of the future.
Yeah. So I noticed that it's very common for parents to be a little scared or unsure when their child gets first diagnosed. And I think that's okay because it's new territory for them. They don't know how to do it all on their own. They're going to need some help. But it's very easy for them to think that, oh, there's things that they're never going to do. And I always envisioned this future for my children. And now it's not going to look like that for this one. And feeling a little like pessimistic about the whole thing, as much as you would be pessimistic about your own child. But what I would tell parents is that this autism diagnosis alters their future. It doesn't ruin it. And so it might look a little different, and the path that you get there is different. But autistics can do all kinds of amazing things if they're encouraged in that. If they're encouraged in their special interests, they can utilize that in some way, even if it's not what they do professionally. With early interventions that really seeks to empower them in their specific and unique skills and abilities, they can get to the point that they can handle themselves. They can advocate for themselves. They can take on all these practical life skills. And I really want to give those parents the hope that there's things that their child can do, and that autism is just one of the things about them, and it's not all them, but it's what makes them uniquely them, part of it anyway. So if you go into it thinking about it instead of all the things that it changes in terms of like, oh, they're never going to do this. But if you think about it in terms of the possibilities that it will bring, I think that's that reframes it, and it gives you a direction to go in that just makes the whole future brighter.
Oh, I love that. And it's so true. And really thinking about what does that look like, and how does their life work for them when you find yourself as a parent maybe stuck in this idea of, oh, all these people are posting this and that on social media, and those things are, well, I thought there was this certain path, right? Like you said earlier, there's this idea of a certain path. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that's the best path.
Yeah.
It means
And
that, like you said, it's just a different path.
yeah. And I think that this is something that's said a lot, and it definitely bears repeating here, that people only show the best of themselves on social media. So that family you see that looks so glamorous and successful, you have no idea what goes on at home. You have no idea what kind of tensions or conflicts they have in their house. You just don't know. And it's probably, they have their own, just like you have your own. And I think that it really says something that what is your definition of success for your child? If your autistic child can graduate high school, can graduate college, what an amazing accomplishment to share with the world. That despite all of the obstacles in their way, they were able to overcome those and do amazing things. That to me is that is the type of thing to shout from the rooftops, to be so proud of over this, like, Jones family who is showing their like cookie cutter stereotypical success. So I think that the special needs parents and the special needs kids are really the superstars. So success is a social construct, and it really is all what you make of it. You don't have to go by the measuring rod of what someone else thinks success is.
It's so true. So this idea where really questioning that, why does it have to look a certain way? And isn't that rigid thinking in itself? So,
Yeah,
sometimes we'll
it
say,
is.
oh,
They say autistics have rigid thinking.
exactly. So what does that say? When we have this idea where it has to look a certain way, and we're always talking about how to help autistic children be more flexible. Well, let's we'll take some advice there and become
Yeah, I mean,
ourselves.
just about every autistic symptom, I know neurotypical people who meet that symptom too. So how much of it is really autism?
Amy, thank you so much for coming on with me today. It is always so fun to talk with you. And I know you and I have already talked about you coming back. But again, as always, enjoy, interviewing you. So I know our watchers and listeners are going to want to learn more about you, speaking events, all of that goodness. So how do they do that?
They can go to my website at amylangston.com, and they can email me at amy@amylangston.com. If they go to my website, they can check out all the business opportunities I'm available for. They can check out my blog where I have some autism related topics. They can see the editing and the speaking and the trainings that I'm available for. I'm available for all different types of contexts. And I really pride myself on personalizing the services. So if there's any topic or context that they have in mind, they can just contact me about how I might be able to help them.
I love that. And thanks again, Amy, and we'll talk soon.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Take care. Thank you for joining me today. Don't forget to click that subscribe button so you don't miss any future episodes. If you like this episode, please share it with someone. It may just be what they need to watch today. If you're a parent, I'd love if you came on over and joined our Facebook group, Autism ADHD Group for Parents. If you're a therapist or educator, come on over to our group, Autism ADHD Group for Therapists and Educators. You're going to find those links right down there in the notes. Thanks so much, and I can't wait to see you in the next episode.
All content provided is protected under applicable copyright, patent, trademark, and other proprietary rights. All content is provided for informational and educational purposes only. No content is intended to be a substitute for professional medical or psychological diagnosis, advice, or treatment. Information provided does not create an agreement for service between Holly Blanc Moses Crossvine Clinical Group, the interviewee, Holly Blanc Moses LLC, and the recipient. Consult your physician regarding the applicability of any opinions or recommendations with respect to your symptoms or medical condition or the symptoms or medical condition of your family member. Children or adults who show signs of dangerous behavior toward themselves and/or others should be placed immediately under the care of a qualified professional.